good writing is always easy to remember. Mm-hmm. It's a real sign. It's so interesting. If it's written so that the psychological connections make sense, it's really easy to learn. I mean, big, long speeches are a different thing, and you just have to sit down and sort of learn them, Other writing is horrendously difficult to learn, and it's because the connections are not, they're just not the right psychological connections or something. I'm not quite sure, but.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home program. I'm Scott Mantz. I'll be moderating this conversation. So without further ado, it is my honor, my pleasure to introduce right before the holidays. She is an Oscar winner. She is a multiple Emmy winner. She is a multiple SAG winner, and she is the recipient of the most recent SAG Lifetime Achievement Award. Please welcome Dame Helen Mirren. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. So, and I am at home. I'm genuinely at home.
That makes two of us. It makes a whole lot of our performers who are watching. And I have to say, Helen, I've been a fan of the Yellowstone mythology since day one, and I loved the prequel series 1883. But when I first saw the image of you and Harrison Ford embracing on that very first image that was released for 1923, I went, I am so in, let's go. So my first question for you, Helen, is how did this even come about for you? And what were your first conversations with creator and showrunner Taylor Sheridan?
Well, very interestingly, it came in the normal way, through my agent. There's this offer out. And of course, as all actors know, the first thing you say is, well, great. I'd love to read a script. There are no scripts. Oh, that's interesting. So yes, Taylor, likes to write with already in his mind the sense of who's going to play the role, which I absolutely understand creatively, artistically. I totally understand that. But obviously for an actor, it is very much a leap into the unknown. So I don't know. I didn't have a conversation with Taylor about what work he'd seen of mine that made him feel that he wanted to, me to be a part of it. But I did say to him, look, I think we should meet because, you don't know me. We've never met. You should get a sense of who I am if you are going to be writing specifically for me. I presume it's in a sense for me, Helen Mirren, as much as for me, Cara Dutton, the character. The two, will meld together. And he thought that was a good idea. So I went and met him in Texas. I had a great evening with him. And I jumped in, very happily, not knowing, really having any idea of what I was jumping into, except obviously I'd seen 1890, so I was getting the numbers wrong, 1893. I'd seen some of, the modern Yellowstone. I wasn't, I just hadn't had the time to sort of, binge watch every Yellowstone episode, but I'd certainly seen some of it and been very impressed especially by the female characters who were so strong. So, I jumped in.
So here's the question. So that's really interesting that you, without a script to go on, how immediately working in that way did that take you out of a comfort zone that you usually have going forward with projects?
I think what's so great, I found that I loved the process. We'd work on 3 scripts at a time, 3, maybe 4 scripts. So we'd have an idea of what 4 episodes would be, but no idea what was going to happen after that, which I think is not unheard of in this sort of television work, which I've never actually done this kind of television work before. But I loved it because it's more like real life. We don't know. I don't know what's going to happen next week, the week after. Our life is an unraveling carpet of mystery, isn't it? So I love the fact that I didn't, and I still don't know, where we're going to go with this. I have no idea. But I found it a very exciting way to work. And also I do like to work fast. I like to, I don't like to overwork things. I like to make instinctive decisions and then just go with it, Sometimes they're wrong, but so be it. So sometimes you make wrong decisions in life, and that's the way life is as well. So I quite liked that sort of absolutely instinctive sort of way of working. I'm really enjoying it.
So let me ask you a question. So when you first met Taylor that night in Texas, and the conversations that you had with him, because like you pointed out, the role of Cara Dutton and the role of Helen Mirren are going to, kind of come together here. So as you were talking through the story of 1923, and as you were talking through the character, like, were there some suggestions, because, this wasn't written yet in full, that like you had for the character of Cara Dutton?
Yes, absolutely. The first thing was I felt she should be Irish, an Irish immigrant. When we were shooting in Butte, Montana, an old mining town that has an extraordinary history, when Butte was at its height of success as a mining town, there were Irish people there were Moldovan people there were Scottish people there were Cornish people there were Welsh people there were Spanish people there. So it must have been a cacophony of different accents and cultures and foods. And that is how, the early America was. And it always used to sort of rather worry me when I watched Westerns and everybody spoke with an American accent. In fact, they were fairly recent immigrants. So I very much wanted to sort of, and that was, I did ask Taylor if it would be all right if I played her Irish, and he absolutely was in agreement with that, which was great. And also, therefore, being Irish, a woman of faith, although we don't overwork that, but it is always there in the background, the sort of the Irish Catholic sort of sense of faith as well. So those were the two elements that I brought to the character that might not have been there if I hadn't suggested them. I don't think they probably would have been.
See, that's really interesting, because when I was watching 1923, and I heard not just with your character, but with a number of the characters in 1923, they have these really strong accents. And I went,
Scottish, absolutely. And I think maybe, I don't know, I don't want to take credit for that at all, but it was something I sort of, to a certain extent, proselytized about.
Sure.
That sense of immigration.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was ever thus in America. Well, that's what America is.
Yeah.
No, sure. I find it so extraordinary nowadays that people boast about their distant relatives coming over on the Mayflower. That is the creme de la creme of aristocratic, Americanness, is to say my forebears were immigrants coming on a boat,
Sure.
Illegally, if you like, to America, and still to this day, it's what gives America its incredible vibrancy and creativity. It's what's I've always loved about America. I've always said, I'm married to American. I've lived in America. I've got my American passport. I drive with an American driving license. I've always said I will never be as American as the woman who's walking across the Rio Grande tonight, because I always had a return ticket. And real Americans don't have a return ticket. No, they came with no return ticket, and they still come with no return ticket. They give up everything everything to
Wow.
make a life here. And that's America's enormous strength and power, I think.
Well, one of the other things that struck me when I was watching, just when I saw that first image of you and Harrison together was, wow, I haven't seen the two of you together since I was a senior in high school when I saw them on the Mosquito Coast.
I know, we haven't been together since, and we've loved each other from a distance, but no, and we work very well together, I think, Harrison and I. I mean, I'm still slightly intimidated by Harrison. I think he'd be mortified to hear me say this because he's such an unintimidating person. He's the kindest, most generous, warmest person to be around. But still, I can't, my fangirl thing, I can't quite get over, oh my God, it's Harrison Ford, he's been such and indeed he was when we worked together all those many years ago. He was a huge movie star then, he'd done Star Wars. He was a massive, popular movie star, which he's been ever since. It's an amazing journey that Harrison has taken through our profession. It's really extraordinary, and to be still up there, where he has been for the last 40 years, 50 years is amazing.
So while you were having that conversation with Taylor in Texas, was it already established that Jacob and Cara were going to be equals? Because that's what immediately struck me about their relationship in the very first episode, is that they're total equals. They've got this great bond, but they are equal. So was that established from the beginning, or did that come out of a conversation you had with Taylor, or did that into production?
To me, and I found this when many years ago, I did a series called Prime Suspect, which was a police thing. I always wanted to give the writers total freedom because I think writers are at their best when if they're good writers, when they're absolutely free of anybody's interference, basically. And I think Taylor Sheridan is such an extraordinary writer. You don't, I would never want to interfere with that at all. You just have to let that flow, let that go.
Trust.
Like the sort of wild animal that it is in a way, he's writing, but at the same time, so tight. You don't want to edit a word of his scripts, not a word. There's nothing you want to say, oh, we could cut this bit. Do you mind if we cut this bit? No. It's tight. And when you start playing the scenes, what seems fairly simple on the page, you suddenly realize is very layered. There's a lot going on underneath it. It's great writing. He did say, and he's absolutely right, that he said, she is a woman of her era, and women in the 20s, it was before suffragettism. It was, women, which they're still fighting their way out of, but their role was very, very restricted. Yeah, he said, I have to pay attention to that. But he said, don't worry, you will see her, come into her own. But I love that fact. It's great to see two people of our age, up on a poster. That it's about that. It's what happens after they lived happily ever after, kind of thing. It's what happens after, how you do live happily ever after. And I know this because my relationship with my husband, what happens is you become a partnership, when everything else has moved on, you be in its best possible form, you become an absolute partnership, and you have an equal voice in that partnership. You doesn't mean you don't have discussions about how to move forward, but it becomes a respectful partnership, and I think that's absolutely the relationship that Taylor has written for Harrison and I.
You know, that just brings up a really good question, Helen. So in terms of your Taylor, being a filmmaker, being a director, like what kind of discussions do you have with him about, let's say, Cara Dutton and about approaching Cara Dutton? I mean, do you have those kind of conversations?
No, absolutely not. We don't have those discussions at all. And likewise, I mean, I will certainly read scripts if he has a project that he's becoming interested in and he asks me to read it, which does happen from time to time. Of course, I will read it and, you know, give him my opinion. Sure. But no, I don't in general ask him to read the scripts that I'm going to be involved in. Only if he really, really wants to. No, we lead our professional lives pretty separately. You know, we allow each person to go and do their thing and do it however they want to do it. We don't interfere in each other's lives in that way. No.
Interesting. Yeah. That's a great way to work. So when it came to, you know, I'm glad you brought up Prime Suspect, because when I was watching 1923, I said, oh, well, okay, she's done TV before. She's done Prime Suspect, but that was different because they were like TV movies.
They were like miniseries, each story was a 4-hour story. And it wasn't every week sort of thing, you know. We would do one; it would be a special event, and then, you know, and then we'd leave it for like 18 months normally in between, and then I'd do another one. That was how that one worked. Yes, it wasn't normal TV series. It was more like doing a mini series.
So when it came to doing 1923, when it came to doing a weekly series like this, and also the setting in Montana and, you know, being part of like this established mythology with 1883 and Yellowstone, what were, and I'm guessing there might be a few here to this question, but what were the acting challenges for you?
Well, first of all, we used multiple cameras, and I've worked with 2 or 3 cameras before, never with this many cameras. So you had a situation where you were doing a wide and a 2-shot and a close-up all at the same time. And it took me a while because normally, you know, you're aware, okay, now we're doing the close-up. So you recalibrate the performance for a close-up. You know, it's a very different thing doing this to doing, you know, even a sort of, you know, full length. It's physically, it's a different thing. So I had to learn basically that you're always in close-up. Just don't forget that you're always in close-up. And so you must calibrate. It was an interesting challenge because, you know, I like to use my body, as you can see from me talking, flapping my arms around. But you know, physicality, the stance, you know, hands, all of those things I find very valuable in a performance, important elements. So it was sort of weird to do, to think about from below the neck, but at the same time, just be conscious that you were in close up. So that was the first time I'd ever done that. Yes.
Oh, interesting. So, but what about like the preparation that you did, especially when it came to, you know, riding a wagon and, you know,
oh, well, I had to learn. Yeah, I went to sort of cowboy camp in a sense. I said right at the beginning, I don't ride horses. I mean, I have ridden horses. I've fallen off a horse many times. But I'm not a rider. I don't know how to ride, basically. You know, I get plonked on a horse and I sort of, you know, jog along. I usually find it impossible to get them started, you know, kind of go. They look at me like, no. So I thought I'd better put that out there in case he was expecting some wonderful horsewoman, you know. And he said, no, don't worry, we'll put you in a buggy. So I learned how to drive a buggy, which was great. I loved my buggy. And I had a great teacher, Diane, in Montana. And yes, certainly I came to appreciate horses very much so, and kind of love horses and understand them, which I didn't before. I really didn't understand horses.
What makes Taylor, obviously he's an amazing writer, as you pointed out. I mean, it's like, I don't know how he does it, but But that's why he does it.
None of us know how he does it. It's something miraculous.
Unbelievable. But what makes him, okay, from your point of view, from your perspective, from Harrison's perspective, what makes him a great actor's producer?
Well, first of all, for women, he just writes great women. He has no filter. You know, unfortunately, so many writers for so many years, if they looked at a female character, they just couldn't see it. There was a filter in front of their eyes, and they got confused by that. I always used to say, look, it's really easy to write for women. Just write for a man and give it a woman's name and cast a woman in the role.
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing in the world. But, you know, writers couldn't get their heads around that. Taylor Sheridan absolutely can. He writes women without a sort of, you know, male filter. And therefore he writes just really, really strong, interesting women.
Once you got sort of you were moving forward with playing Cara Dutton, what were some of the other ways that you prepared, and maybe in terms of research of the times? The 1920s were obviously extremely volatile in terms of industrialization and so many things. I mean, the Great Depression was right around the corner, and it was already hitting in Montana from what I read about those times. So what kind of preparation did you get to get a better feel for what the Duttons were living in 1923?
Well, actually, I read an autobiography by a woman, but earlier. It was actually earlier to get a sense of the women who were out there in the West in these small homesteads and the world that they lived in, the physical world that they lived in. It was, I think it was called Earth and Fire, the book. I can't remember now what it was called, but it's a very good autobiography written by a woman in the late 19th century. It was like 1890s, something like that, somewhat earlier than our era. But nonetheless, I thought very valuable to see, to have literally a personal description of that life. And what was so clear was how present death was, and which you see every time you go. I love cemeteries and, you know, old cemeteries where you can see 6 people from one family, you know, dying within 2 years of each other, something like that. The number of children who died. Death was very prevalent, and also moving around, the way people moved around, and that was something very American to me. It still is. Mm-hmm. It's a very American thing, the way Americans move around from one side of America to the other, to the north, to the east, southwest. You know, it strikes me as a sort of an American quality.
What is your take on how Cara Dutton evolves throughout the course of the first season?
Well, she's forced to evolve, and I don't want to give the story away, but she's forced by circumstance to evolve and to take control. So, you know, as I say, I don't know where that's going to end up, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, you know, what's funny is that you said earlier in the conversation that you like to work fast. So when I was at the premiere for 1923 at the Legion in Hollywood, you were there. That was great. That was awesome. It was like a perfect setting.
It was awesome. It was such a great
really
building.
special.
Yes.
I felt very, very, very lucky to be in that room. But Taylor wasn't there because he was still working and editing. And I didn't realize how sort of like close to the best, so to speak.
Oh my God, down the wire. I mean, we were shooting on a hill in Montana the night before that premiere.
Amazing.
So yes, absolutely down the wire. Extraordinary. You know, the whole team there of the crew, starting with the crew, are absolutely extraordinary, hardworking. As I say, we've got multiple cameras, and the production side is quite intimidating. The organization. And they are incredibly impressive. but as you say, you know, the editing staff and everyone sort of, and then putting the music in, yeah, they work fast. Yeah.
So between 1923, I got to say, you are got a lot going on. You are very, very busy. 1923, the Barbie movie, the Fast and Furious 10, a Golda.
Okay, yeah.
So the question is, like, what is it that strikes you about a role that you go, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to spend months of my life doing this at this stage of your career?
It's a combination of things, you know, things are just for the pure fun of it. So Shazam, you know, I love the first Shazam movie. I thought it was very sweet, very funny. And I love the idea of the character that I'm playing, this Roman goddess, you know, who doesn't want to play a Roman goddess?
Yeah.
So that's for the pure fun of it, you know. And then other projects like Golda are a much more serious undertaking, if you like. It's more, you're putting your head above the parapet somewhat, you know, to be shot at. But you know, mostly it's whatever's different from what the last thing I've done, you know. I always just love to shake it up a bit and find projects that are very different from each other. So this year is an absolute case in point, you know, to go from Barbie to Golda to Japan to 1923. That's what I love, you know, that you're just constantly mixing it up.
You know, when I have these conversations here with the foundation, I love to ask the actors this question because everyone has a different answer. So, Helen, how do you remember your lines?
I actually, it depends on the writing. With Taylor's work, it's very easy. Good writing is always easy to remember. Mm-hmm. It's a real sign. It's so interesting. You know, if it's written so that the psychological connections make sense, it's really easy to learn. I mean, big, long speeches are a different thing, you know, and you just have to sit down and sort of learn them, you know.
Yeah.
But other writing is horrendously difficult to learn, and it's because the connections are not, you know, they're just not the right psychological connections or something. I'm not quite sure. But what I do is I always have in my bag, my set bag, you know, I always have the next 2 weeks' work. So I try and keep myself at least a week ahead of myself, especially if there are big scenes coming up, you know, with lots of dialogue. I try to get those scenes under my belt at least a week before we're going to shoot them. So as the week progresses. So I always get my assistant to prepare, you know, the next 2 week scenes, which, as you know, jump backwards and forwards. They can be all over the place. But the next 2 week scenes with the day, Monday we're doing this, Tuesday we're doing that, Wednesday we're doing that, Thursday we're doing that. So I have that all in my bag. And then as the week progresses, those come out and get thrown away, and then new ones get put in. And that's the way I work.
Yeah. So like I said, everyone is different, but that's a great process. So the last question I have for you is like how fun, how rewarding has it been for you to be part of this Yellowstone mythology and to work with Harrison Ford again and to play Cara Dutton? How proud?
Very proud. I love the fact, incidentally, that you call it a mythology, because I don't like the word franchise, because franchise sounds like a sort of, I don't know, you know, like a franchise, you know, series of movies about Batman or something. But I see this as much more as a recreation of the mythology of the West. And I think of it is probably terribly pretentious, but I do think of it slightly as the American War and Peace, if you like. It's looking at a huge arc of history through the wonderful device of this one family that you're following through this. And the 20th century, you know, such an incredible century when you think about it, where it started in 1900 and where it finished in 2000, and everything that happened in between. And for me, it was the creation of the mythology of America and what it means to be an American happened in that century, not in the century before. It happened in the 20th century, you know, through the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. You know, I love the fact that you called it a mythology, and I think that's exactly what it is.
That's a really, really great way to point out the century itself, especially when you go from like the 30s, you know, with the Great Depression and the beginnings of World War II to the end of the 60s with landing on the moon.
Yes, two world wars in that century, along with the technological developments.
The internet, I mean, come on,
mind-blowing. It's you know, you start without electricity or automobiles, and you end. It's only 100 years. It's not that long.
You end up being able to buy your
people are 100 years old, you know, it's a lifetime, if you like. It's the most extraordinary century. And I love the fact that we are investigating, you know, the beginnings of it through 1923.
Wonderful. Thank you for this incredible conversation. For everyone watching, be sure to watch 1923. It is streaming now on Paramount Plus. Absolute must-see. Helen Mirren, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Great pleasure.
Of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation Conversation. Happy holidays and happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Thank you. God bless everyone. Happy Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays.